Curiosity arrived with the sunrise, pale and unsure, stretching its fingers across the quiet Wild West town as if asking permission to stay. Spring had softened the land, loosening winter's grip, and the air carried the clean scent of damp earth and horses at rest. Eliza May Holloway stood at the edge of the street with a small carpetbag at her feet, 22 years old and already tired in ways that did not show on the skin. She watched the town wake without expecting welcome, because hope, when carried too often, can bruise a person worse than disappointment. She had learned to stand small. Her dress was plain, mended more times than she could count, sleeves pulled low despite the warming morning. The townsfolk noticed her anyway. They always did. Women paused their sweeping to look twice, men glanced and then looked away, and whispers moved faster than footsteps. A young woman alone was a question no one asked kindly. Eliza felt the familiar tightening in her chest as she stepped forward, each footfall an argument for her own right to exist here. Inside the mercantile, the bell rang too loudly. She asked for work, voice soft but steady, offering strong hands and long hours. The shopkeeper's smile faltered when he saw her properly, when he weighed rumor against need. He declined with politeness sharpened by distance. Eliza thanked him anyway. She always did. Outside, the street seemed wider, emptier. Rejection in frontier towns was rarely cruel. It was simply final, and that made it harder to protest. Across the way, Silas Boone watched without appearing to. At 37, he had the settled stillness of a man who had survived himself. His shoulders were broad, his beard sun-threaded, his clothes worn but cared for, speaking of means without display. Folks said he was wealthy, though no one knew exactly how, and that he preferred land and silence to people. They were not wrong. Silas had learned long ago that quiet was safer than explanation. He noticed the way Eliza held her bag like a shield, the way her eyes lowered when voices rose. Pain left marks beyond bruises, and Silas had spent enough years alone to recognize them. When she dropped a folded paper near the hitching post, he stepped forward and returned it without touching her hand. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them that did not require words. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. Eliza thanked him, surprised by the steadiness of his gaze. Most men looked through her or at her, rarely with her. Silas nodded once and turned away, giving her back her space as if it were something precious. She watched him go, unsettled by the absence of demand in the encounter. It felt like kindness, but kinder still for being incomplete, leaving her free. By midday, the town had decided what it always decided. There was no work for her, no room that did not cost more than she had. Eliza sat on a low step near the edge of town, dust gathering at her hem, wondering how far she could walk before nightfall caught her. Survival had taught her not to cry where people could see. She swallowed the ache and stood again. Silas found her there, not as a savior but as a neighbor. He spoke carefully, as if every word had weight. He asked if she had a place to go. The question was practical, not prying. Eliza shook her head, shame coloring her cheeks. He gestured toward the open land beyond the last buildings, where a small cabin rested among budding trees. He said he had work that needed doing, and a roof that did not ask questions. She followed at a distance, measuring each step, ready to turn back if kindness proved costly. The cabin was simple and clean, light spilling through a single window, the smell of wood and coffee lingering in the air. Silas showed her where she could set her bag, where water could be drawn, then stepped outside, leaving the door open. The choice remained hers. That evening, as the sun leaned low and painted the fields gold, Silas returned with bread and stew. They ate in quiet, the sound of spoons louder than speech. Eliza's hands trembled less as warmth reached her. When the light softened and shadows grew honest, Silas finally spoke again. His voice was gentle, unhurried, and it carried no judgment. "Who hurt you?" he asked, not as an accusation, but as an offering. The words settled between them, heavy and true. Eliza could not answer. Her throat closed, and she looked down at her hands, at the proof of survival etched there. Silas did not press. He only nodded, as if he had expected silence, and in that moment he made a promise he did not say aloud. Whatever had broken her would not reach her here, and whatever she chose to become would be met with patience, not fear. Night settled slowly, and with it came the sound of crickets and distant water moving over stone. Eliza lay awake listening, surprised by the unfamiliar absence of dread. Outside, Silas tended the fire and watched the stars emerge, thinking of roads that led away and one that had quietly turned toward her. The land seemed to breathe, as if aware that something had begun, unnamed yet irreversible in the dark. Spring deepened its hold on the land, and with it Eliza May Holloway began to breathe as though air were no longer borrowed. Days passed gently at Silas Boone's cabin, marked by ordinary rhythms that slowly rewrote her understanding of safety. She learned the sound of his footsteps, unhurried and predictable, learned that doors could remain unlocked without consequence, learned that quiet did not always mean danger. Silas never asked her to explain herself. Instead, he trusted time to do what force never could. Work became a shared language between them. Eliza tended the small garden, repaired clothing, swept floors already clean. Silas worked the land, mended fences, hauled supplies. They spoke in fragments, in looks, in the careful passing of tools. Each gesture carried respect. Each morning he greeted her as if her presence were expected, not tolerated. Slowly, the habit of apology loosened its grip on her tongue. The town, however, did not forget. Whispers followed Eliza whenever she walked beside Silas through the main street. Women paused mid-sentence. Men weighed conclusions they had no right to reach. A woman living under a man's roof without his name was an invitation for judgment. Eliza felt the old shame stir, the reflex to disappear before being cast out. She suggested one evening that she should move on, spare him trouble, spare herself the stares. Silas listened, his expression steady. He did not dismiss her fear or soften it with promises. The next morning, he simply walked with her into town. He stood beside her at the counter, paid for supplies, spoke her name clearly. When someone asked questions shaped like concern, Silas answered with calm certainty. Eliza belongs here. No defense, no explanation. Just truth spoken without apology. Something shifted then, not in the town, but in Eliza. She felt her spine straighten, felt her feet claim the ground beneath them. Shame, she realized, survived on secrecy. In the open air, beside someone unafraid, it weakened. She met a woman's eyes and did not look away. She thanked a shopkeeper without shrinking. These were small victories, but they stitched her back together. Nights remained the hardest. Memory does not obey daylight. Some evenings, Eliza woke shaking, breath caught in her chest. Silas never asked why. He left a lamp burning, a cup of water within reach. Once, she found him sitting outside her door until her breathing slowed. He did not touch her. He did not leave. Trust grew not from grand gestures, but from consistency. One evening, as the air cooled and stars brightened, Eliza spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it did not tremble. She told him she had believed pain was all she deserved, that love was something other people were born knowing how to keep. She did not give details, only truths shaped by years of endurance. Silas listened as if each word mattered, because it did. When she finished, he said nothing for a long moment. Then he told her what he had learned the hard way, that suffering is not a measure of worth, that survival is not a stain. What happened to you is not who you are. The words settled deep, untying knots she had carried too long. For the first time, Eliza cried without fear of consequence. From that night forward, something gentle but certain grew between them. Not urgency, not possession, but choice renewed each day. Silas admired the way Eliza laughed once she remembered how. Eliza admired his steadiness, his quiet humor, his care for small things. Affection appeared in shared meals, in mended seams, in hands brushing without retreat. By summer's edge, the town adjusted as towns do. Curiosity dulled. Gossip tired itself out. What remained was a woman who walked with dignity and a man who stood beside her without apology. Eliza no longer measured her worth by whispers. She measured it by the peace she carried. One morning, Silas asked if she would stay, not because she needed shelter, but because he wanted a life with her. Eliza answered without hesitation. Yes was easy when it was free. They built their days deliberately, honoring the quiet that saved them both. Healing did not erase the past, but it softened its hold. Love, Eliza learned, was not loud. It was steady. And in that steadiness, she finally felt whole. The land seemed to recognize the change as well. Grass thickened, water ran clearer, and mornings arrived without dread. Eliza found herself planning seasons ahead, something she had never dared before. She imagined curtains sewn by her own hands, meals shared at a table worn smooth by years, laughter settling into the walls like smoke. Silas watched these changes with quiet pride, understanding that love did not rescue, but accompanied. On a calm evening, they stood together watching the sun sink behind the hills. Eliza rested her head against his shoulder, unafraid of being seen, unafraid of being claimed by joy. Silas did not speak, because the moment required no vow. The promise he had made in silence was being kept, day by day. If this story continues, it is because healing never truly ends. It simply deepens, carrying forward into tomorrows shaped by choice, kindness, and a love strong enough to ask, and gentle enough to wait. Hope stayed with them, quiet and enduring, proving that safety once found can become a lifelong home together always.